What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Scratch Agency podcast, hosted by Scratch Agents for Scratch Agents. My name is Stephen Turnbull, founder of T5 Insurance Services in Utica, New York, and I am joined today by my co-host, the one and only Mr. Shawn Fitzgerald of LAF Advisors in Long Island, New York. Mr. Fitzgerald, what's going on today, sir?
Man, we got a whole bunch of stuff going on. I'm glad we got Colby on the show today because I got a lot of things to talk about. I want to dive and get nitty-gritty in the numbers, so I'm happy to have you on, Colby.
Well, before we get into that, you got a busy month coming up. We're recording this at the end of July. I think you got something going on next month, don't you?
Yep, I got a newborn coming August 15th-ish. So, yeah, I'm going to have 2 under 2. I'm trying to get on Mavericks level, have the 3 under 3. So, I think I'm stopping at 2. That's what I tell myself. But, hey, I told myself I'm stopping at 1. Now I have 2.
And here we
Who
are.
knows when I'll stop? Maybe I'll pull a Doug Benz and have 6 of them. I don't know.
Oh, man. Well, best of luck. Congratulations, obviously. That's exciting times. I've got my 2 dogs, and that is plenty for me to keep track of, especially trying to keep track of myself. But like Shawn said, we're super excited to have Colby Allen joining the podcast from Agency Focus today. Colby, how are you today, sir? Thanks for joining us.
I'm in South Louisiana, and the joke's that it's always hot, so it's hard to get away from.
There you go. Perfect.
Other than that, man, doing great.
Appreciate you taking the time to join us today and looking forward to getting into the conversation. Why don't you just start by introducing yourself to the listeners, maybe the first time they've heard of you, and then how'd you get into this space and a little bit of that, and then we'll jump into what we want to talk about.
Sure. Well, first, I'm right behind Shawn. I have 1 at 2, so we missed the 2 under 2 mark, but we're might be close. We'll see. But yeah, my name is Colby Allen. I live in Louisiana, so in the Deep South. And I have been in the insurance industry, different roles and capacities for 11 years now. It's hard to think about, right? We used to look up to people, and now we're like, oh, wait, we are those old people. 11 years. Started with a super regional agency, which was Regents Insurance at the time. I double majored in insurance and finance. So I was looking for a job in insurance, but had that insurance kind of background and applications of finance. So I started as an FP&A intern, and then worked my way up through that agency in a couple different roles for about 5 years until we eventually sold to BB&T Insurance, which was rebranded to McGriff, and then was with that agency through very similar roles for about 3 more years. Through that time, worked in different financial roles and capacities and also marketing. In particular, what brought me to Agency Focus was my experience was when we would acquire agencies, doing a lot of the legwork to do the book of business transfers and all the contract updates and that type of thing. So the M&A space was something I was familiar with because I did it for a number of years. When Regents was sold to BB&T, I was a pretty big part of, again, transferring all the revenue between Regents and BB&T. At the time it was $125 million, so it was pretty considerable. And then also worked at a carrier for 2 years because, you know what, I got bored of the agency space. Why not also go to the carrier side? So worked at a regional carrier for 2 years, helping rebrand and kind of do some communication updates for their agency relations and marketing team.
Thing I just want to touch on before we move on, you got a degree in insurance and finance, you said. What was the why behind that? I mean, a lot of people don't. Everyone says, "Oh, people fall into the industry." You have maybe family people like myself that come from a family background, but where was the why behind the insurance for your studies?
So I'll give you the professional and the personal answer. How about that?
Perfect. I'll take both.
So personal, I was actually dating a girl at the time that was still in school, and I was taking a break, and I was looking for job security. And when I found the insurance major, it seemed like it was pretty small. There weren't a lot of people. And when I met the program head, he started off by saying, all of my students have a 100% career rate before graduation. So I was like, okay, sign me up, right? Originally, I wanted to go into safety. I have a number of OSHA certifications and worked for a construction company too before that. So I was looking at safety, and insurance and risk management was kind of in that same space. Started with the agency that I was at the time, looking to be like a loss control or a safety rep intern, but actually shifted into finance pretty quickly because, again, that was kind of my background, and it seemed to be a better fit.
Cool.
So the personal answer, I was chasing a girl. Professional answer is job security and ended up being a great place. So
I hear you, man. So how did what drew you to Agency Focus? Because I mean, what a great business plan what Carrie has set up over there is awesome. I mean, if you add, I feel like, Stephen, tell me if I'm wrong. You talk to any insurance agent and you bring up agency evaluation, Carrie's name pops up.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure.
So how did you two get connected, and like what drew you to the company?
Sure. So I was at Carrier at the time, again in the marketing department there, and inspiration from people like y'all started to get the entrepreneur's itch.
Yeah.
Was in the industry for, again, 10 years, and I was like, you know what? I know I have probably better potential probably going out on my own. And so I had a business plan to actually go into consulting for my own, doing M&A and stuff like that for agents.
Cool.
And then ended up being introduced to Carrie, and history's, hit run from there. So that was kind of my background with doing the M&A work for a bigger agency and what we do here for the valuations and a lot of that advisory space, that it seemed to just be a good fit.
Love it. Love it. So let's talk about, and this is something Stephen and I have talked about. We've gotten this question a lot from a lot of other agents too. As a scratch agent, and I would think this is a very common question, when is the right time to hire your first employee? And from Stephen and I talking to probably hundreds of different agents, it seems as though the answer is different for everyone, depending on what you focus on, where you're located, and all that type of stuff. But just in a general sense, for a scratch agent who's starting from zero and is not taking in a bunch of investor capital, they're truly starting from zero, what generally is that good first hire, and when is usually the right time for that first new hire?
Sure. So I know it's not the answer you probably want to hear, but it depends.
Yep.
But let's kind of take a step back and look at, I would ask you, why are you asking the question, do I need to hire somebody? Mm-hmm. And that will typically give you the insight that you need to take those extra steps in that direction. Usually the advice that we give, so we do valuations, but also really it's a larger package of financial consulting. And so kind of to your point, we help a lot of agencies with either budgeting or fractional CFO work. And so the financial planning and strategy of the agency is something that we work on day in and day out. So planning headcount is something part of our natural service and product. But that first hire as a scratch owner is challenging.
Yeah, it's nerve-wracking too.
Well, it's nerve-wracking because, one, there's a lot of money involved. You're building the plane as you're flying it. There's a lot of moving parts. And so really the goal is, what we typically encourage owners is, why are you asking that question now? And let's go through an exercise to get some better direction on when that should happen. Because typically what I would say is people that are really good at making decisions, oftentimes the decision is made before they get to that point. So I think a good exercise we typically walk through in the conversation is, one, identifying your skill sets. Because again, as the owner right now, you're doing all the sales, you're doing all the quoting, you're doing all the servicing, all the marketing for the agent, you're doing everything, you're wearing every single hat. And so from a business owner standpoint, there's a couple buckets that your business operates in. So you've got sales and marketing, you've got operations, and then you've got financial. Depending upon the time of day, right? You're putting on a different hat to do those different roles.
Yeah.
And so usually there's a couple scenarios that pop up that either triggers or prompts you to start asking that question. Mm-hmm. And that's going to be, am I starting to spend more time doing service requests? Am I spending more time doing quoting? Do I have some system or hurdle in place that's causing me to kind of lose value in other areas? And so the goal of hiring is just an economic principle of specialization of labor, in that doing a matrix of, in these three buckets of sales, operations, and marketing, and financial, mm-hmm. list out your roles and figure out, looking ahead, at what point do I know I need to bring in someone to help me continue the momentum that I've got going?
Yeah. Mm.
We always give agencies, kind of the advice of, if you can, you hire into growth. You don't really look retroactively and try to fill in cracks, because then you're hiring out of desperation.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's really good advice. Billy gave me that advice early on. I was starting to get to a point where I noticed the service work starting to pick up. Mm-hmm. And I remember when I spoke to Billy, he's like, hey, maybe you should think of bringing somebody on now. And I'm like, in my head, I was initially like, it's a lot of extra money. I might not have a full day of work packed out, not enough work for them. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And his kind of advice was, hey, it's better to do it now while you have the time. You can build out the process and procedures as you hire her and go. Because if you do it when you're just drowning in service work, you're not going to be able to onboard her the right way. You're not going to be able to train her the right way, and it's going to be a mess. So I really do agree with that. Do you find, Colby, that a lot of agents are bringing on VAs as their first hire?
Right now, yes. If you asked that question a couple years ago, not as common. But it is somewhat of a lot of the things that bog you down are some of those transactional tasks. And so instead of getting to a point of needing a licensed person that has to handle certain things based on your state laws, because some things have to be handled by a licensed person. But if it's really just a number of transactional tasks that you can delegate or outsource to someone else, that's definitely a viable option and affordable option for a lot of owners.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I mean, that's the route I took. And I found that was a blessing for me. Because instead of having to wait till I could afford somebody who was $60,000+ a year, I was able to pay, more than half that cost. And I was able to continue my sales process and train her and whatnot. And it was a great fit for where I was at. So just to keep building off this, I think one of the other things to talk about is we hear a lot about, Rian's best practices and best practices agencies, and your total payroll, including the owner, should be somewhere about 40% of what your total revenue is, right? For a scratch agent, someone under $1 million in revenue, does that apply at all? Is it okay if you're at like 70% in payroll? Like, talk to me about that a little bit.
I mean, that's a big question, because I'll even tell you, as a financial consultant, ratios are very informative and very intuitive once you are familiar with them. Yeah. But as you scale your business, they're going to change.
Yeah.
So with the same headcount, if you grow your revenue by 10, 20%, your comp ratio is going to change, right? So yeah, they're meant to be a guide and give you some inference as to what's something you should look for. But that does not mean at all that should be a hard and fast, bold number on a spreadsheet that you need to try to aim for, right? Because as you grow, or even as you might lose business, that's going to fluctuate over time. And so,
for sure,
like with those best practices, there are some metrics like revenue per employee, compensation per employee. Those are KPIs that, again, give you some direction, but that doesn't mean that, if on the chart your revenue per employee hits 160,000, you need to hire somebody. There's a lot of other questions that can go into that help influence, because your agency efficiency metrics could also be different. Because one agency can manage 120,000 per person, others can handle over 200,000 per person. The goal is to really know you, know yourself, know your needs and the roles you need to put in place to scale and to keep your momentum going. That's what's going to really drive you. Because I'll tell you, we do use that report. We do use a lot of that research in our services, but it also still is an individual consultative approach with that owner and trying to meet their goals.
So can we let's dive into that a little bit. You said early on, one of the things one of the notes I took here was when you sit down with a client and you're going over these things, identifying the skill sets, right? So the skill sets of a scratch agent can be completely different, obviously, from person to person. And so if you have Shawn and I, who are both one-man shows, and just using this for example purpose, and our skill sets are completely different, walk us through that process. Walk us through the process where you may recommend your professional opinion that Shawn hires faster than I do, or and what that might look like and why.
Sure. So there's a million different metrics that can influence that conversation. But from a high level, I'll go back to, say, like those three buckets. You've got sales and marketing, you've got operations, you've got finance. And a good exercise is, on a piece of paper, write down those three categories, and then list out the roles and the job descriptions that you are currently doing today. That doesn't just mean like sales and marketing, yes, I do that. But try to get specific of, okay, I'm doing this type of networking activity in terms of quoting, right? I'm going to X number of Carrie websites to get quotes. Try to be as specific as you can so that you can identify what you're currently doing. From there, you can then also drill down into, okay, I know I'm really good at this. I'm really efficient at this. Or I'm really terrible at this. You can then put some again, some inference on this is where my time is most valuable. This is where my time is being hindered or is a roadblock. From there, that can kind of start your wheels turning on, if I had somebody that was doing this role, I can invest more time in this other area and arbitrage the difference in those values to continue growing where I'm growing.
Interesting. And Colby, what around that first hire, right? Because we touched on noticing a little bit of a trend with more agencies hiring VAs, and I told you that's exactly the route I went. Are you noticing, only because AI is becoming more prominent, right? Are you noticing that more agents are also investing more in technology? The younger scratch agents. Do you see that like as a trend as well?
Oh, for sure. I would ask your opinion about that, because like coming from the agency side and a lot of the agencies we work with, in our valuation services, I can tell you we see agencies in the entire spectrum, right? You've got some owners that are in their late 70s and don't even have an AMS, but they know their clients. And then you've got some owners probably like y'all, or younger or newer, that one of the first things they do is buy a platform to help manage their workflows.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So yeah, it is crucial. And I can tell you from an efficiency standpoint, but also a data validation standpoint, in terms of preparing to sell your agency, one of the biggest risk factors that we always look for is how can you validate the data that you're telling us that you have? And so the better you can have those established practices of good data hygiene and quality, the higher value your agency will be.
I got you. So having that AMS 360, or having that management system, maybe having QuickBooks connected to all your business cards and all that type of stuff. What other
Can we take a step back there and maybe ask a question about that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Because also it doesn't always make sense either to go out and buy the best AMS when you have no business in the door.
True.
So as a scratch owner, you got to have money coming in before you have money going out in most cases, right? To be prudent.
Agreed.
Okay.
Agreed. Yeah, that was a mistake. That was a mistake of mine, but I've talked about that on the podcast before. Steven, you go.
Yeah,
that's why I brought it up.
Yep. All right. A few things here. I'm trying to read my handwriting over here. The one thing I want to say, and it's more of just a comment, and Colby can certainly comment to this, but in the last 14 months I've said on this podcast, I've made an offer on 4 agencies. 2 of those agencies did not have a management system. And the process of gathering the information as a potential buyer and the confidence of gathering that information was so different on those 2 than the ones that did. Especially the ones where, like you said, how can you validate that information? And I this is more or less just a comment because I've experienced that over the last year.
Sure.
That's one thing. I'm seriously trying to sit here and read my handwriting. What is talk about the danger, and we talk about this a lot on the podcast, but I want to see your thoughts of just what with the clients that you work with, the danger of comparing yourself to others. And we can add on top of that from a premium count standpoint of, well, you shouldn't hire your first person until you're at $1 million premium. Sure. I can tell you, not that I'm going to say anything just for the podcast, but just between Shawn and I in our discussions, our volume numbers compared to policies on the books are so different. In the same state, just different type of appetite that we go after, different territory, all that stuff. So do not get into the habit of, well, I talked to my friend Bob, and Bob didn't hire his first employee till $800,000, so I'm not going to do that. Because, and I'll shut up in a second, but because that directly correlates to the investment of that first person and what can that first person do. And I'm calling myself out right now because Shawn and I talk about this daily recently. I'm at that pivotal moment. I'm not making revenue sitting behind my desk doing the quoting, adding attachments to my management system, this and that. Now I brought on a VA, and that's helping me very much, and those things are happening, but I'm still starting to be at the point of I need to be the community guy. I need to get the stuff in the door like I was and was good at before I started my scratch agency. So I think it's just such an interesting conversation because you can't compare yourself to others because everybody can do this differently. And one of the first things I wrote down is identifying your skill sets when you sit down and talk to somebody because everybody has different skill sets. I just think, just could you comment on that for me?
Sure. Oh man, you're hitting some hot buttons. So, do y'all follow Alex Hormozy?
Yep.
Okay, so he recently just talked about this. He said he doesn't think that comparison is a thief of joy. It's whenever you use that comparison to have feelings of jealousy or envy or something that someone else has that you don't. But if you do look at the value of comparison as to what is that person doing that I can learn from, that's a different story. So in terms of benchmarks or best practices, yeah, it's good to know what other successful agencies are doing, but again, they're not you, right?
Say that again.
You are
Say that again.
I love that.
You are T5 and you are LAF. There's nobody else that will be that, right?
Yeah.
And that's a good thing because you're going to attract clients that want to work with you. If they wanted to be with that other agency, they would be with that other agency. So the best risk that you can take is on yourself, because we'll get a little financial nerdiness going, okay? So one of the factors for valuing a company is the factor of diversification. So when you think of like publicly traded companies, and when you invest in a publicly traded company, the quote unquote beta factor or the investment factor is relative to the market because it's diversified revenue. They've got a number of income streams. It's a management board, right? There's a lot of things that help safeguard a lot of things. As a private business, the beta for your company is you, right?
Yeah.
If you want great reward, you're going to take great risk. And so the best bet you can make is on yourself.
Yeah. That's just, Steven, you have something to say. You go.
No, I'm trying to write all this down. I mean, this is just, it makes complete sense. I mean,
Here's a thought too. And I had this note and I want to ask y'all because it kind of maybe goes to that. We'll just have a little fun. Any other like Breaking Bad fans?
No,
I've watched it.
I haven't.
I've partaked.
Okay. I mean, it's a pretty dark show, but there's a couple scenes that are just super powerful. And as we were like preparing to talk, I remember this one scene. I went back and rewatched it. And there's one scene where Walter White is sitting down with Jesse Pinkman, who's his business partner, and they have an exit opportunity. Okay. They have somebody that wants to buy a lot of their materials that they use to make the drugs, and it's going to give them a lot of money. All the other partners want to sell, and Walter's like, no, I'm not selling. And so he asks him, he's like, what are you holding out for? Like, why are you doing this? And he tells him a story of, I used to be a partner in this company, and then I sold for this much because it was a big money for my family. And you know what that company's worth today? It's worth billions, right? And so he's got this thing in the back of his mind where like, missed opportunity. And so he asked him, he's like, well, he asked me if I was in the drug business. You asked me if I was in the money business. I'm not in either one. I'm in the empire business. And how many,
I like that.
How many agency owners do you know? Like, yes, you're building up your firm. Right now it's relatively small compared to a lot of others. But what's your end goal, right? Are you trying to build an empire? Are you trying to build a legacy that's your name or the impact you're trying to make on your community?
Great, Colby. Now I'm going to run through a wall.
Not to compare your agency to a drug, empire, but I think that motivation and that drive to where like, yeah, you're selling insurance, but it's not about the insurance, right? You're trying to build something that's much bigger than yourself.
And that can be different for everybody. And I'm laughing because Shawn and I had this conversation about 3 hours ago. Exactly what you're talking about. And we're planning to do an episode with somebody who I think is very, very good at this of like, what do you want to be when you grow up? Not yourself, the agency. What are you looking to do? And everybody has different goals. Am I going to build this thing and sell it for the most? There's different ways you want to take to get there. Am I going to keep this in the family as a third, fourth generation business? Whatever that is, there's different ways to get there. Here, pivoting a little bit if we can. With all the M&A going out there and all the money flying around and all the crazy multiples over the last couple of years and all that, out of my opportunities in little small town USA here, all of them have been concerned about the book, about the people, about the staff, about the community. All four of those that I ran into just recently, right? What is from doing this every day on a national scale and talking with different sellers and talking with different buyers, what are you seeing in relation to that? Because I think everyone's selling out to these all multiples. Everyone's getting bought out. Oh my gosh. And we're running back in the back of our minds again of the what ifs. But I still think just from my little experience here that there's still the people that are worried about those things that I mentioned. What's your take on that?
I think you're starting to experience something that we see on a day-to-day basis. Most owners that we talk to that are preparing to sell or retire or transfer to their family or whatever they're going through, money is important, But the number one and number two things that we hear over and over again are my employees going to be taken care of, and are my clients going to be taken care of? There are plenty circumstances and situations where people leave money on the table because those things are more important to them than that dollar figure. Mm-hmm. And so there are kind of two categories or multiple categories of agencies that are looking to sell. So there are some that do scale to 5, 10, 15 million in revenue, and their goal is to exit to a large national PE-based firm or a publicly traded firm to get as much as they can. But we also have other clients that we work with that are that same size, 5, 10 million in annual revenue, that it's important to them that they, like you said, have that legacy within their own community. And so it is something that we see day in and day out.
I like that. Let's bring this back for the scratch agent, right? Where, if I'm starting scratch, what is the data I should be paying the most attention to and tracking? This way I can, if I need to call an agency focus or somebody else to help with evaluation or just budgeting, planning, whatever the case is, what are some good data points to keep track of right off the bat from a data standpoint?
Sure. So it depends on if you have your AMS established and you're using it on a regular basis. I will point back to, yes, there are some hard numbers that you can pull out of a program or that you get on a report or a dashboard.
Yeah.
But the biggest driver for you is going to be probably that mental data point, right? What are your skill sets and the threshold for you that's going to maintain your momentum and your peace of mind so that your agency continues to grow? How does that translate? Okay, it can translate into not a premium number, but okay, I know at 300 policies, I'm starting to have some issues maintaining a balance between sales and service. So I'm gonna look for that KPI to say, okay, I don't want to get close to this metric. I need to start talking to somebody or start bringing another VA or what that means. Gotcha. That could translate to revenue. There can be variations between those because, like you both mentioned, your book is going to look different where you are. Because we work with some agencies that their average commission per client is higher than the average, which means their policy count is lower. And so for them, the KPI is not necessarily policy count, it could be revenue. Total revenue, total policy count, total client count, those are kind of the three high-level numbers or KPIs you can look at. And from there, as the owner, knowing your business, knowing your skill set, try to look at designing a roadmap of, I know this is my threshold for when I can't handle it anymore, or I need to have someone to help me. Because also kind of going back to that Walter Wright mentality, you wear all the hats. You know this business in and out better than anybody. And it's not just for insurance, but any business. Like my dad's business owner, he's a contractor. And I can tell you the biggest stress for him is the mindset that he can do everything better than every employee that he has.
Yeah.
And so it's also the humility of trusting someone else and their skill set not to hold you back, because it's not going to be perfect. It's never going to be 100%. But their efforts are going to help propel and scale the efforts that you have. Because think about this. You can't multiply your company unless you can multiply yourself. And you can't do that. No. So the only way to grow and multiply your company is to bring on other people to support your efforts.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And just to share a quick story, because I think us as agents, maybe it's because we have that entrepreneurial bug and we're a bit of visionaries, right? Not to boost my own ego there, but I feel like we tend to get pulled in a bunch of different directions, and we easily go look at all those other things, right?
Yep.
And what I love about the name of Agency Focus, which now that I'm just thinking about it, like when I hired Carrie and brought her on to help me with budgeting and planning and things of that nature, it does help you focus on what you should be looking at, your budgeting and your financial planning. And what helped me the most was benchmarking, right? Like, hey, you're at 250,000 revenue. Let's get you to 5, and then we'll talk about those other couple of things, right? So really focusing on what you need. And I think what you said, Colby, which is super important, is knowing what you need help with, right? So I knew I had a budgeting and planning problem. I would look at my QuickBooks and get anxiety and like, oh, I don't even know really what I'm looking at. I don't know how to budget. I don't even know how I should be budgeting. It is definitely a weakness of mine. And that's kind of when I was like, you know what, I need to make a call and hire somebody to help me with this because I don't know what I'm doing. But to build off that, before I go all over the place, when should a scratch agent, look to bring on an agency focus or somebody to help them with their budgeting and planning?
So once you get to the point of having consistent operational expenses, you do need some type of direction or guidance and plan on what you want to do with it. So, I mean, in the beginning, you're selling and servicing out of your house, right? You're just, again, trying to get money into your account. It kind of goes to that division of labor because, again, you can't focus on everything and focus on it super well. Taking a little bit of time to look at it closely kind of gets you on the page that you need to. Another thing to consider is it's pretty daunting to look at, say, like a consultant like us or outsourcing services and think like, I'm paying what per hour for them to do that? That is, what value am I getting out of that? But it's not always about the dollars, because if you think the opportunity cost of your lost sales, if you think of the opportunity costs for the time you're not spending with your family, right? So it doesn't always translate to a necessarily dollar figure, but again, it's that value system of, can this person do this more efficiently than I can so that I can leverage my value in other places?
Well, I think it comes back to skill set, right? I mean, if you enjoy looking at the numbers and you enjoy planning for that and you're semi good at it, then great. And if all you want to do is put your head down and sell insurance, that's probably something you should delegate to a different team, you know? And I mean, that goes back to how everybody's different.
Yeah. Because I can tell you, I've worked with producers that they are the most phenomenal salespeople you ever meet in your life. But if you put an Excel spreadsheet in front of them, they're like, what even is this, right? Tell me one or two numbers I need to know and get out of my face.
Yeah.
But they're really good at what they do. And that's the thing. They also hire people to help empower that momentum so that they keep it up.
Yeah. I got an interesting question that I was thinking of sitting here. If you had, let's remove everything that we should be doing, right? We're going to remove all of the numbers that we should hit, the benchmarks and all that. Over the years, with all of the agency owners that you've met with that are looking to sell their book, if you had to pick one thing that they would go back and do differently when they started their agency, that one thing that they would have paid more attention to, the one thing that they would have completely done the opposite way they did it 20, 30, 40 years later when they're now looking to sell, what would you think historically that response would be from those agency owners that are looking to sell?
Oh, man.
Sorry for putting you on the spot.
I wish they bought an AMS.
Some. But again, there's other value that they could be really good at sales, so they build a book. But, oh, man. The two biggest things currently, and that have always been an issue, are thinking that they are the only successful producer that they can hire. And so it's pretty common. Even some agencies get up to 500, 600, 700,000 in revenue, and it's all in one producer.
Yeah, I could see that. I could see that. Listen, I'm not perfect, and there's definitely, I don't know if it's ego that's partially involved, but I think when you go, especially when you go from producer to an agency owner, you almost have a little bit of a hard time letting go of certain things because you think, hey, if I just do it myself, it's going to get done exactly the way I want it. The customer's going to love it, blah, blah. And that's kind of the standard I want to live by.
Yep.
But we all know that's not the way it should go, you know? So I am not surprised that's the answer, actually, because I've struggled with that a little bit myself. I'm getting better, but it's definitely an area that I've struggled in. And
so, I mean, also producer hiring is very difficult because not everybody's good at sales. And so you need to hire the right person to help grow your agency, but also you need to hire that person if you want to continue to sell the dream. Yeah. Part of that is, of course, the biggest controversial question around producer ownership in their book. It's a problem we also deal with pretty often, but there are ways to design compensation plans that are very incentive without also giving up a ton of equity in your agency. And so that's also a big conversation we have with a lot of producers or owners, because they'll come to us for evaluation and say, okay, I'm ready to sell. And a question we ask is there producer ownership? And if they say yes, well, okay, well, then you technically only own 50% of your agency, even though you've got X amount of revenue.
So here's something else that just came to mind. And if you got to get back to us, I don't mean to change the topic and put you on the spot, but I'm going to. So an agency owner that we know has been looking for a customer service rep, commercial lines. And I don't know, 4-6 weeks maybe, had a job posted, got one applicant in 4 to 6 weeks, local, come to the office, this and that. Hard out there, hard to get people. The person didn't want to take the job. He called me this morning. Last night, he changed the listing to remote opportunity, and he woke up.
Exploded.
He woke up with 32 applications in his inbox.
Yep.
So for 4 to 6 weeks, whatever that number was, he got one applicant. He changed it to remote, and he got 30, whatever I said, 32, 36. I can't remember what he said. 30 applicants overnight. My question around that comment is what, like, with hiring and finding people, what's the trait that you guys are seeing? Is it the remote work? Is it, like you said, it's hard to hire those producers, and Shawn mentioned selling the dream. With the agencies that you're consulting, what is the common theme that you're seeing for people that are having success? And I think that's important to bring into this episode, because we're talking about hiring the first person, and that's great.
Yep.
If we all come to the conclusion, we're ready, we're going to hire that first person, but how are we going to find that right person, and how are we going to make it work? So, what's a common theme around clients you're working with that you see doing that?
So one, that's an amazing question, an amazing example of that. And I'll tie it together with the number 2 thing that we see, right? Because they are directly related. Yes, hiring remotely is necessary now. Because if you think about it, if you only limit your desired skill search within a certain geography, you're limiting your pool, right? You're kind of increasing the likelihood that the person you find is going to be very specific in either their skill set or their experience or whatever that may be. Versus if you do open it more broadly, other than some consideration for like payroll taxes and like some of the more HR kind of friction that comes with some of those things. But really, again, technology and systems kind of mitigate a lot of that, right? And it's not really that much extra cost. Like I'm in Louisiana, Carrie's in South Carolina. One of our financial analysts on our team, Lauren, is in South Carolina. We have a VA on our team who's overseas. We've got no issues. And so it's one, expanding your pool for qualified applicants is just a no-brainer. As long as you have the technology and the communication, the trust, because it is difficult to trust somebody remotely. We won't deny that. But again, if you've got open communication channels, a lot of the fears that people have of hiring local can very easily be mitigated or have things to, increase your confidence. And how that ties to our second point, let me jump to it. I'll ask you. So the second biggest thing we see for agencies that we work with that are getting ready to sell is physical locations. And I'll tell you why that's important. So one of the biggest factors for the value of an agency is the potential profitability. And so if the agency is profitable, it's going to be worth more. One of the biggest items on your P&L statement is rent, occupancy expenses, utilities. Those are very big items. And so if you don't really keep those in check, or if you have this mindset of, I have to have an office in this town so that people know we're there and we can maintain a presence, if you can cover that expense, then it's not a problem, right? But if you aren't really covering that expense proportionally, then that's a big problem. Because when you go to sell, the conversation then turns to the fears that people have around being bought by a big company of like, they're just coming in to cut expenses. They're just coming in to fire people. They're going to close offices. And I'll tell you why. Because when they do their financial analysis, they have to factor in those things to get to the profitability they need. Versus if you're running your agency lean, efficient, in ways that are good and already profitable, those changes don't need to be made. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah,
Totally.
It makes complete sense. I'm wondering what app you used to chime into Shawn and I's phone call this morning, because everything that you brought up is what is what we've been talking about today. I mean, no, it makes complete sense. And one interesting thing with this guy that I was talking to this morning, who had that example I gave, that I told him, I said, I bet you half of those people, because he was like, I can't get over how many people have experience, and he's looking for a commercial line CSR. I said, I bet you half of those people, it's not that they're unhappy with where they are. There's probably just not given the opportunity to work remote. And
Yep.
after COVID now, all my friends are working from home. I'd like to give that a shot, but I got to be in the office 9 to 5. I bet you there's a lot of that with just that small pool of people that he got in overnight, which I still think is incredible.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, Colby, one thing I wanted to ask you before we start wrapping this thing up, and this brings us, we're going to go full circle back to the beginning here, about new hires. There's been a lot of chatter about leveraging debt to bring on a new employee. Do you think that makes sense for somebody that's building a scratch agency, or do you think that puts them in kind of a bad place because now they have this loan with this crazy interest rate and, they're kind of putting themselves in a hole? What's your thought process behind leveraging debt to bring somebody on?
Sure. So, from a financial standpoint, when we talk about making an investment, there's different types of investments. You got financial investments, you've got operational investments, technology. It's an inhuman word to say, but a very big component is human capital, right? So when you invest money in payroll into people, it is a financial investment because you are trying to get some type of return out of their efforts and their labor, et cetera. So in some cases, if you start your agency with a loan, either from the SBA or some other financing means, that's the risk that you can calculate. I, like, in the moment, I would say I'm kind of impartial. I personally wouldn't go out and get, say, like a $40,000 loan to just hire somebody. But if it's part of a bigger strategic plan that you are legitimately growing, so you're actually hiring into growth and not backfilling cracks because things are falling through.
Yeah.
You just have to look at it also from a cash flow and a risk standpoint.
That makes sense. Colby, the agencies that you see that sell and are the most profitable, those top agencies, have you found that they utilize debt?
Typically, no. It's very common for people to use debt or loan to buy a book of business because it's very expensive.
Yeah.
And unless you've got, cash in the bank, it's hard to do. With interest rates right now, it does put some different pressure because as the interest rate rises, your cash flow analysis changes because your break even is going to be pushed back. You're taking a longer payback period to try to pay off that book of business or whatever the investment is you're making.
Okay.
So if you're growing and you actually have the legitimate reduced risk in other areas, you can logically make assumptions that you can cash flow certain things. Again, I'm not going to just say, yeah, you should, again, take out a loan of $50,000 and hire somebody. But from an analysis standpoint, there can be some cases where if you have the other support around it, and that's a risk that you're willing to take, then that's a risk that you're willing to take.
Gotcha. Well, listen, I had one more thing I wanted to say before Stephen wraps this up.
There's always one more thing, man.
Yeah, there's always one more thing. I think there's, and I wanted to give a little bit of a shout out to you and Carrie over here, because when Carrie helped me with my planning and budgeting, I think the biggest thing that I got out of it, and I just figured this would be good to share with the audience, is the fact that it gave me clarity on where I'm headed, and it's interesting because Stephen brought this up earlier. And I think the way she explained it from a benchmarking standpoint really helped me the most. And I think the power of knowing where you're going is extremely important. And I don't know if anyone's ever heard the Will Smith, he had like this is kind of before he went crazy, but he had this one clip where he talks about just decide. It's a famous video he has. It's like, just decide what you want, where you're going, and execute, And I think there's a lot of power in that. Like, once you know what you want and you have that path, I mean, you could just hyper focus on it and hit straight ahead. So it's something I wanted to touch on and give you guys kudos for, because that was something that was super helpful for me specifically.
Yeah, thank you. And that's actually one of the joys that we have in what we do, because, like I said, that skill set, we have very specific skill sets that people try to hire us and bring us in to help with. And it's because, as an owner, you're good at selling, you're good at servicing, you're doing a number of other things. And so just taking that couple seconds or that couple minutes to really sit down and focus on one thing, get your couple takeaways and your highlights to help you kind of set that direction. And then our goal is to support you in reaching your goals. People say like, well, you're going to put in a budget, you're going to tell me not to spend money. Actually, no, and a lot of times we actually encourage you to invest in certain places because it's going to help you get to that goal.
Yeah. And there could be times where you're actually not, according to you guys, you're not investing enough into the business.
Yeah.
So,
but here's the big point. I want to wrap up with that. It's a lonely place being a scratch agent, especially if you're a one-man show. And whether it's you hire somebody like Colby or you talk to a mentor or whatever it is, it's almost the justification of you're on the right track, make these small changes, and it'll help you get to this next point faster. Or, and everything that we talked about in this episode. Time and time again, we say in this podcast, it is okay to ask questions. In this industry, it is amazing how many mentors, how many just people like Colby will just answer any questions you have. Put yourself out there. Don't be worried to say, I got no idea what I should be looking at when I look up my bank report every month or every week or whatever it is, right? Because what's the worst thing that's going to happen? If you reach out to somebody to talk to them, they don't reply to you. What's the worst thing that's going to happen? You got to get out there, get the information so that you can move that step forward. But Colby, we're going to wrap up here. Thanks very much for joining us. Could you just tell folks where to follow you, get in touch with you, learn a little bit about more what you're doing if they want to?
Sure. So always on LinkedIn, Colby Allen. Our website is agency-focus.com. You can find ways to contact and reach us there. And so, again, budgeting or fractional CFO work, if you want to get your agency valued for business planning purposes, you don't have to sell, right? If you're, like you said, just looking for those insights and learn where you stand so that you can help set that direction, that's also something we do, again, all the time. So can I share one thing real quick?
Yeah.
So when Shawn and I met in New York, so Stephen, you had mentioned that Shawn won an award from the Big I. Another part of that event was there was a panel of young agents. And so there were 3 of them on a panel where Emmanuel was asking them questions. And Shawn was there answering questions as an agency owner. And I was very impressed at his humility and a lot of the ways that he answered those questions. And so I'm super excited to stay in contact with y'all and remain friends and see where you are today, but where you're going to be in 5, 10, 15 years.
Hey, thank you, Colby. I appreciate that.
You got me blushing over here from my man, Shawn. All right, baby. Well, Colby, thank you very much for joining us. Everybody, that is another great episode of the Scratch Agency Podcast. Thanks for joining us. Do us a favor. Like the show, share the show, and subscribe. Most importantly, remember to dig down deep, believe in yourself, and own your own future. We'll see you next week. Take care.